My life is a chip in your pile. Ante up. So this is something that I've kind of wanted to go on a long ramble about for a really long time, but I haven't had context with which to do it because I don't really talk about video games here. I've done one other video game related entry in this entire channel, and that was many years ago. But you know what? It's my channel. I'm going to talk about what I want. So consider this to be a new occasional series because, and granted, before it led to something more, but I did Why Gotham is Awesome. So this will be the second entry in Why It's Awesome. So this will be an occasional, something that I do just to ramble about something that I really love that I don't have some other context to talk about. It'll be uploaded sporadically like nitpick rants in that way, but I want to talk about my favorite video game of all time, Final Fantasy VI. I knew it as Final Fantasy III back when I played it on the Super Nintendo. In fact, I still have it. In the box at that. Thing of beauty. So, I have played this specific cartridge probably all the way through to completion 3 times. I have played it to completion when it was re-released on the PS1. I played it through to completion when it was re-released on the Game Boy Advance. I would say all things told, I've probably sunk between 200 and 300 hours into this game. And now I'm just gonna rant at you about all the reasons why it's amazing. Let's start with story, because that's the true heart of any RPG, especially the 16-bit era of RPGs. They weren't big, showy, technical kind of things, although some of them could look very pretty in very certain ways, but it was all about the story. That's why you were there. Now, I did mention the one other video game video I have up here, and that was me kind of tearing the Final Fantasy VII, which is a very good game, but I noted in that video, and I'll reiterate here, because I don't expect anyone to go that far back into my channel, that Final Fantasy VII began the tradition of very overcomplicated stories with bizarre twists that don't really make sense in them, being kind of a Final Fantasy staple. Final Fantasy VI predates that. And it is a wonderfully straightforward story. In fact, almost simplistic to the point that you would think it would be dull, because you have an oppressive empire, you have a group of resistance fighters, those are the characters you control, go. And if that sounds generic in the broad strokes, it is, but it's down to the fine details. It's down, first of all, to the characters. This is a phenomenal cast of characters, but I'll be getting into more into them later. But it's also just the way that the story unfolds over time, and the way that the story is told, not so much that the actual plot and synopsis of it is particularly original. And I'll tell you what I mean. When I first fired up this game, I got sucked in very early on. So when the game opens, we get a bit of text. It doesn't lay out Empire Evil Returners, which is the resistance group, good. Instead, it gives us background. War of the Magi. Magic was destructive. Magic hasn't been seen in a long time. We're in an age of technology, but magic might be coming back, and that's dangerous. That's the context we're given. And then we get our initial 3 characters that we control. That's Vix, Wedge, and Terra. Should have been Biggs. And actually, I think in later versions after the SNES, they did fix that because it was supposed to be a Star Wars reference, but in the original version, it was Vix, so that's what's in my head. So you take the 3 of them and you head into this town where an Esper has been discovered. An Esper being a believed extinct kind of magical creature. So first of all, it's this slow pacing of these characters in this magical driven armor, basically a mech suit, walking across the snow in the Mode 7 graphics as this gorgeous music. I'll be talking about the music some more again later too, plays, and the opening credits roll, and it is cinematic. It's not how video games started, not back in 1994. But then you get there and you get into what is usually the big slog of any RPG, which is the tutorial section, where the game has to acclimate you to, how the combat works, the different options, how you manage your character's inventory, and all that stuff. And it's almost always a slog in every RPG, because they have to give you these little rinky-dink challenges. Generally, they put the story on hold, or actually many times they won't really allow the story to start until they've gotten the tutorializing done and out of the way. So here, you get into this town, and again, these are the characters you control, so immediately you assume, oh, I'm controlling the good guys. So you get into the town, and you are attacked. The town marshals, whatever, they attack you first, and you wipe the floor with them. Piece of cake. So you're learning the combat mechanics in combat and fights that aren't actually much of a threat to you. Not particularly atypical, but stick with me. So you get there, you get to the Esper, you get one boss fight, and the guy's basically got one trick up his sleeve that you deal with. Oh, okay, cool. So I know to pay attention to certain things. Awesome. But then you get to the Esper, and Vixen Wedge, gone. Terra, the one who remains, gets recovered, and now you start to get more information that you actually just played your tutorial section playing the bad guys. Terra was under mind control, but the other two were just soldiers of the Empire. And not only were you playing the bad guys, but those sort of Magitech armor that you were wearing, that's gone. So now you get out into the mines trying to escape, and you're now fighting the exact same things that you were just slapping around left and right with your Magitech armor without that armor. Which means that fights that were a piece of cake for you a minute ago now become harder, and you have to pay attention to, and it's completely organic. It is a wonderful mix of how the gameplay helps and enhances the story, rather than the story got put on hold so we could give you a tutorial section. And the more that you think about it as you get on, you go, oh crap, not only was I playing as the bad guys, but I had all that technology. That means that's what I have to try and fight. It immediately establishes the power and strength of the Empire. It gives you all the tutorializing you need, and then bumps you down to a lower level that feels organic and doesn't make you feel nerfed. It makes sense within the story, and the entire game is littered with moments like that where storytelling and gameplay meet. So even though the broad strokes of assemble your party, get a resistance group, take on the Empire is really generic in the broad strokes, the various execution of various points of that story is just done so well. And I mentioned the characters. This thing has a big cast. There are 14 playable characters in this thing, 12 main ones and 2 bonus characters. Well, I say bonus, optional. They come in way late in the game and they're not plot necessary. But all the other 12, you encounter them as the story goes along, and they're all great characters. I'll talk about how they play a little bit later, but right now let's just talk characterization. This is probably my favorite group of characters in a Final Fantasy game, because despite there being 12 of them, nobody feels redundant, everybody's unique, and yet nobody feels like they were brought in from another game. Because, let's be honest, you play Final Fantasy VII, Cait Sith feels like he's from another game compared to the rest of these guys. You play Final Fantasy IX, you look at Quina and go, really? Alternately, you play something like Final Fantasy VIII, and they're all interchangeable. They're all the same age with the same history and the same background. Here, every single one of these characters has a unique story, a unique perspective, a unique voice. And I have reason to love every single one of these characters. I think I'm probably partial to Locke myself, but this entire cast is phenomenal. And then there's the look, the visual aesthetic. I adore the artwork of Yoshitaka Amano. And even though he has continued to do promotional artwork for the Final Fantasy series from this was the last game where he actually did the character and some of the monster design himself. He didn't take somebody else's design and do his spin on it from the promotional. He was doing the art initially, and I love this guy's art so much, and it is so perfectly captured in the portrait images of the characters when you go to your main menu screen, and in the monsters. Now, to me, this was actually the first Final Fantasy game that I sat down to play, but I was aware of Final Fantasy before this because I had a subscription to Nintendo Power. I've actually got all those still sitting around in a box somewhere. But I kind of knew Final Fantasy in my head as the game with the really cool monster sprites, because I would look at those and go, that's really neat. And I remember I think it was actually an article they did on Final Fantasy Legend for the Game Boy, but there was this piece of art that was a Yoshitaka Amano piece of art, this huge, intimidating character just like holding I think it was a city in his hand as this desert drained through his fingers. He's snarling, looking at that going, I don't know what this is. I don't know if I'll ever play it, but man, that's gorgeous. And I think this game really captures the spirit of his artwork so well. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the music and circle back on that again. Oh man, Nobuo Uematsu he's a legend of video game composition, and rightfully so. I own the soundtracks of a number of games that he did music for, including some of the other Final Fantasy games. This is my favorite soundtrack that he did. And not for the reason that most people are gonna cite, oh, the opera. I like the opera. I don't consider it as much of a seminal moment as a lot of people seem to for some reason. What I love about the music is every single character has their own theme music. Now, that's not actually atypical for Final Fantasy, but remember, there's 14 of them, plus there's unique themes for 2 of the villains, for Emperor Gestahl and for Kefka. And whatever information you didn't get about these characters just based off of their sprite or their portrait images, you get the remainder information just by how their soundtrack sounds. Locke has this bold, adventuring kind of track. Terra has a much more melancholy track, reflecting the fact that she is trying to figure out who she is, and she's very much a journey. It's the traveling music. Celeste's track has a sense of longing to it. Strago's just kind of sounds old and crotchety. Mog gets the goofy track because, hey, he's a Moogle. And on and on and on. And it's just, oh my god, the music is so good. And not only does every character have their own unique track, although it just occurred to me, and if I don't say this, somebody will point it out in the comments. Yes, Edgar and Sabin have the same track because they're brothers. I know that. Let's move on. If it's an important location, it gets its own track as well. Even incidental background characters like Rachel for Locke's background story, she gets her own track, and that's gorgeous too. Now let's talk a little bit more about the gameplay, because any game can have a great story, even great characters. If it's not fun to play, it doesn't matter. It's a slog and you're not going to enjoy it. This game is so much fun to play. First of all, the combat. You are in and out of it so quick because it just, you zoom right into it, you fight, and you're done. It doesn't do the thing that they've started doing ever since Final Fantasy went 3D, which is, we're in the fight, and now we're gonna pan around so you can see every angle on this character, and your character's face it. Like, no, you're fighting, go, done, move on. So it helps battle the fact that the game probably could feel a little bit grindy. I honestly never felt that it did, but the combat is so quick that does a lot to alleviate any possible grindiness you might be feeling. There's also a surprising amount of nuance to the combat, but more than that, to the characters, because this is another thing that I love about these characters. Besides, great characterization, story, look, all of that. What I really love about these characters is within the function of the game, every single one of them is useful. And yes, every single one. There is no superfluous, there is no point, there is no thing this character is good at. Character, they don't exist. How many games with a sizable party can claim that? Much less one with 14 playable characters. And before you argue with me, I'm not going to go through point for every character, but let me make a couple things clear. Not every character is useful throughout the entire game. Some characters are going to be super useful when you first get them. Edgar's a great example of that. His tools, things like the auto crossbow, the noise blaster, the drill, they are going to be your go-to things for a long time, but then other characters surpass him, so he doesn't stand out as much later on, but he had his moment to shine. Ditto with Cyan in that respect, because his early stuff is really good at the time you get him. There are some that are good pretty much the whole time you have them. Sabin's a good example of that. Some don't get their proper potential until a bit later, like Terra. Some characters are fairly situational, but Yumero, really good to have at the Fanatic's Tower. Go with his mimic thing, you gotta time it right, but you do it right, works really well. Some characters take a bit of time to get to work. Gao, that's a bit of a grindy character, but if you're willing to sink the time into him, he's a powerhouse. Even the characters you might think are useless are actually quite good if you know what you're doing. Because now every character has their own unique ability, but here's the thing, not everybody's unique ability is great. Now, every character can learn magic, every character can actually learn every spell in the game, but if you pay attention to their stats, you realize who should actually be using what and who should be doing magic as opposed to doing, just the melee fighting and things like, or sticking to whatever their special talent is. So let's take Realm, one of the more maligned characters, because her unique ability is kind of useless. And even as an upgraded version, that is only slightly less useless. But if you pay attention, then you will notice that she has the highest magic attack stat base level in the game. So, one of the fun things about this game, as you level up, and the way you learn magic is you equip different espers so that you can learn their spells, but also if you have them equipped at the point that you level up, you will get a boost to certain stats depending on who you have equipped at the time. So, if you want, and you want to kind of have everybody the same, you can use that to boost stats that maybe they're weak on, give somebody some extra hit points, bring their defense up. Or if you're like me and you like to lean into a character's skill, you boost the heck out of what they're already good at and make them a monster at it. You boost Realm on her attacks, on her magic attack skill, when she's already got the best starting base stat in the game. Yeah, she will be your go-to magic user and she will destroy everything. My favorite discovery, though, for figuring out how a character that I was like, I can't figure out what this guy's good for, Setzer. Now, Setzer's special skill is this sort of slot machine thing, and it's something that's been reused since then. Kate Sith had it in Final Fantasy VII. Now, again, keep in mind, I've sunk somewhere between 200 and 300 hours into this thing. There are combinations on that slot machine I have never, ever seen. I don't know what the percentage on the random number generator is. I just have to assume that no one's actually ever seen them. So, forget that. But here's the thing. There's a relic, and relics are, most relics can be used by most characters. Some can only use specific ones. This is actually one that anyone can use. There's a relic called the Offering. Now, what the Offering lets you do is whenever you choose the attack option, you hit 4 times instead of 1. Now, initially, sounds great, awesome, but when you actually start using it, what you realize quickly is you're not really doing more damage. Your character is simply taking the damage that would have been done in 1 hit and splitting it across 4 hits instead. And if there's multiple enemies on the screen, he or she might jump between them, hit this one for 2, hit that one for 1, and then the one in the middle for 1. And because you can't really control that, and it's a little bit random who gets the hits, it doesn't seem that useful anymore. But there are certain weapons that, because the nature of what is determining the attack value of that weapon is separate from the normal stats that most weapons use, they are kind of exceptions to that rule, and the Offering doesn't split up their damage the same way. Like I said, there's a couple of weapons that do that. One of them is a weapon exclusive to Setzer. It's called the Loaded Dice. Now, the Loaded Dice is a randomized weapon. He throws dice, and depending on what you roll, you will do damage. Now, you roll on the high end of that, he is capable of doing now 9,999 points of damage. That is the most you can hit for in the game. Of course, it's a roll. Maybe you hit for nothing, but you know what? That roll is not split apart by Offering. Every time he attacks with Offering, it's a fresh roll, which means you equip him with the Loaded Dice and the Offering. He rolls 4 times. I guarantee you at least one of those is going to hit for 8,000 plus damage. If you're lucky, he might even do that twice. So like I said, every single character has use. Some of them you need to kind of dig into to figure out what it could be. Some of them you do need to do some specific building and working with them, Strago, Gao, but everyone has use. There is no useless character in this game. Now, some of the things I just mentioned, if you know how to take advantage of them, like how powerful Realm gets with her magic, how powerful Setzer is when you pair that weapon with that relic, you might think, You're overpowered by the end. You're just burning through the game. The last dungeon of this thing. And I'm just going to talk about this dungeon design without getting into spoilers, because I'll talk about some more spoiler stuff at the back end, just in case. Game's 24 years old and I'm worried about spoilers. Whatever. So the last dungeon, you can't just pick your strongest group and power through the thing. You actually have to make 3 parties of up to 4 characters apiece. Now remember, there are 12 basic characters and 2 bonus characters. So if you have everybody, there's 2 you can cycle out. If you didn't get the bonus characters, you have to use every single character, whether you've built them up or not. If you have not recovered every character because of the way the second half of the game works, you might even be short. So now you've got to balance and figure out, oh, okay, fine. So if I put my strong magic attacker here and get this lined up, so with decent defense, I'll get a good melee fighter over here. I've got this one with the good. So you've got to divvy it up across the 3. You can't have any be the weak one, because they're all going to have to deal with some serious stuff as they work their way along their portion of the last dungeon. And then the last boss is truly epic. It is a tiered fight. You work your way up just this mountain of insanity. And trust me, as overpowered as you may have just thought I described, you will need every advantage you can get, because the final boss, he has a move that no matter what you've got going on for you, will put you at 1 health. And you will be scrambling to fix whatever characters you can before he starts wiping you out by just flicking snot at you. And so now I want to get into some of the stuff that would constitute spoilers, some of the latter half story turns, and a little bit more about the villain. So if you have not played this game yet, if anything I have said has convinced you to play this game, go and play the game and don't watch the rest of this. Just know I'm just going to keep jabbering on about what's awesome about this game. So spoilers in 3, 2, 1. All right, so the heroes lose. Halfway through the game, the heroes lose. Your goal is to prevent the Empire from taking control of this floating continent that will allow them to just make the world as they see fit. Well, you get there, and the Emperor, who has been a legitimate threat up to this point, working totally legit as a villain, he gets taken out by his lieutenant, Kefka. Oh, Kefka. In my mind, best villain of the Final Fantasy series. Not the coolest villain, Sephiroth gets that, but Kefka's the best. He's so hateable as a villain. But, so, he decides, he very much is the Joker of Final Fantasy. And 15 years before Heath Ledger would say it, this guy, he just wants to watch the world burn. So Emperor Gestahl wants to rule the world. Kefka just wants to mess it up for fun. So he kills Gestahl and then deliberately screws everything up, and the world effectively ends. Our heroes are flung to the far corners of the world. Numerous towns get destroyed. The world is literally reshaped. Everything you were fighting to prevent happens. And then you start again, in control of a character that you have never had individual control over up to this point, and you got to try and pick up the pieces. And that's another thing about the way the story unfolds. There's no one clear-cut central character. There are central characters to different segments, but there's no single hero of this story. Most other Final Fantasy games, there is. Final Fantasy IV, it's Cecil. 7, it's Cloud. 8, it's Squall. Then Zidane, Titus. You've got a clear cut, this is your main character. It's not the case here. They give you 12 characters, all of them fully developed. And when you start in the second half of the game, you're controlling Celeste, who you've never controlled by herself before. Unless you want to count the opera. But all the characters that you might have thought, oh, that's who I'll start with, because that's who I started with in the beginning, like maybe Terra, Locke, Edgar, Sabin even. Call those your original 4. Nope. No idea where they are. You've got Celeste. I love that this game does not have a clear central character. It makes the ensemble stronger. And since I brought him up, let's talk about Kefka. Now, if I were to play Final Fantasy VI for the very first time now, I would probably call that he's going to end up being the final baddie at the end of the game, because the recurring, repeated, doesn't seem totally trustworthy, looks like a mid-boss, but he keeps coming back, character kind of taking over the story from who we thought was going to be the big villain. I'm not going to go so far as to say it's cliche, but it happens enough that I might have called it. At the age of 12 playing it for the first time, no, I didn't call it. But he is just so wonderfully hateable. Because that laugh, that 16-bit digitized laugh. I remember just before the floating continent segment, you've gone to and you basically have just negotiated peace between the Empire and the Espers. Like, and even to the point that the characters all kind of turn to the camera and do a wave like, oh, I guess that's the end. And then you hear that laugh. And you just feel it in your gut like, oh, shit. And as a final boss, he looks great. He talks great. His music is wonderfully maddening. He is a worthy final foe to have to take down. I love this guy as a villain. But after you beat him, you get what is my own personal favorite ending of any video game ever, all time. And it's not because there's some big twist that happens. It's not because there's a gorgeous cinematic you sit back and enjoy. It's because it is satisfying in a way that no other video game ending I've ever seen is. Because it gives you, every single one of these characters gets a moment. You get to hear their theme again. You get to see an image of something that exemplifies them, and then you get to see them as you're all working to, get out of this castle built by a madman that's crumbling now that he's dead, and you're all working to get out of there. They each have a moment to shine, and it varies. Some of them are funny. Some of them are touching. Some of them are tragic. And it flows naturally from one to the other. Everyone has their moment, and the music swells and it builds, and by the end, when they're back on that airship and it just goes, it is so triumphant, and it is such a climax. The credits are rolling during this point, but you wouldn't notice. You're not noticing these credits. You're just sitting there, and then that airship sails off at the very end, and it goes to black and it ends, and you just feel, and the music, and you just feel yourself go, it's just so satisfying. It is almost a half hour long, and it's riveting. After spending however many hours you choose to sink into this game with these characters who are all so well realized, so well developed, who have their own music themes that you get to hear again as part of this ending. Oh my God. Nothing else has ever come close. I actually had an initial real big disappointment with the ending to Final Fantasy VII. Not because it's bad, but because my standard was Final Fantasy VI. And I'm sorry, nothing else comes close. Never has. I've played games that I love, I adore, that wrap up in terrific ways, maybe some of which I'll even talk about on future entries into this series, but I'll never have an ending that satisfies the way this ending satisfies. And for that, and for so many other reasons, Final Fantasy VI is my favorite video game of all time. So that's my long, rambly, I've now killed my voice. Just going on and on about why Final Fantasy VI is awesome. I don't know what some of the other things will be that I'll talk about in this. I'll probably get some other video games in there. I'll probably get some movies that I really love and I don't have occasion to talk about otherwise. We'll see what comes up. But Final Fantasy VI, have you played it? What do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Do all the stuff, like, subscribe. I've got Twitter and email and podcasts, and I've got a Patreon. Links for all that stuff is down below. And until next time, this council is adjourned.